If you haven't heard about Anchor, it's the easiest way to make a podcast. Let me explain. It's free. There's creation tools that allow you to record and edit your podcast right from your phone or computer. Anchor will distribute your podcast for you so it can be heard on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and many more. You can make money from your podcast with no minimum listenership. It's everything you need to make a podcast in one place. Download the free Anchor app or go to anchor.fm to get started. Hello. This is the Think Generational Wealth podcast with your host, Amir Estimo. First off, I'd like to say, if you're listening to this podcast right now, thank you very much. Thank you very much for taking the time out of your day to listen to this podcast when you could have been listening to millions of podcasts that are out there. I really do appreciate it. And as I'm looking to grow this podcast and grow and share my journey, I'm hoping I can bring one of you on this podcast and be able to share your journey too, where you came from, because I believe everyone has a story. Everyone has a story to share, and it's crazy whether it's good or bad. But the good thing about it is how your story turns out, because you are in charge of your life. You are in charge of your life. So I really do thank you, because time is more valuable than money. You cannot get back time. You can always get back money. And like I said, as we continue to grow this podcast, I would love to bring you on here and be able to share your journey. So thank you very much, first of all. And please do me a favor, go on to Apple Tunes, subscribe to our podcast, leave a review, whether it's good or bad. I'm open to it. It's only going to make me better. I think in life, you got to be open to feedback. And, even if it's good or bad, it's only going to make you a better person. So, and it's going to make me a better podcast host. This is something I'm trying. I've been doing now for the past about a couple of months now with me and my buddy, Jimmy Jean. If you've been noticing lately, I've been doing a little bit more on just with me. But, at the end of the day, my goal for 2020 was to be more consistent with the podcast. It's something I truly enjoy. It's something I love to do. I don't even listen to music anymore. All I do is listen to podcasts, which, by the way, I'm going to get back to this topic at hand, which is ownership. Today's podcast is ownership. And subscribe to our podcast, Apple Tunes. Email us at thinkgenwealth at gmail.com. Follow us at Instagram at thinkgenwealth. Join our Facebook group, Think Generational Wealth. Just plug in and help us grow as a community. So today's episode or podcast is ownership. And the reason I pulled up on this and I want to talk about ownership, I was listening to Jocko Willink. I don't know if any of you have read his book, Extreme Ownership. Highly recommend this book. I haven't read it, but it's one book where it's if any of you read Rich Dad Poor Dad, this book is on that level, because he was a ex-Navy SEAL, if I can remember correctly. He was an ex-Navy SEAL, and he's retired currently right now. And he wrote this book about ownership. And what he does is he gives accounts of his time, during the Navy, especially when he was in, if I can't remember, I think it was Iraq or Afghanistan, one of the two. And he would give an account, and he currently now has a consulting business. And he goes and does consulting for businesses when it comes about leadership. He has a new book out. Don't have the name of it, but check it out. You can Google it, Jocko Willink. He has a podcast, Jocko Willink Podcast. And it's a very, very Very good book. I highly recommend this book. But when we talk about ownership, the one thing, he was on the Bigger Pockets podcast. I was listening to the podcast one. So if you get a chance, go and listen. If you haven't, Bigger Pockets podcast. They have the Bigger Pockets Money podcast, the Bigger Pockets Finance podcast. So Bigger Pockets is a real estate investing podcast. So if you're a real estate investor, there's a lot of value on there. They've interviewed all sorts of guests. From Gary Vaynerchuk, Jocko Willnick, Cal Newton, the guy who wrote the book Deep Work. They've had a variety of guests on there, and it's a lot of value. So if you get a chance, go and subscribe to their podcast. But Jocko, this book, Extreme Ownership, is I think it really makes you think when it comes to about you being control of your life, and you taking ownership for everything that happens in your life. Because we're in a society this day where it's easy just to pass the buck. Even my 13-year-old daughter, who's in middle school right now, sometimes I have to, having kids, I realize is one of the hardest things in life. I think being married and having kids is the two hardest things I've had to do in my life, because you have sometimes we've grown in different generations, and the generation that we grew up in, I'm an 80s baby. So the generation I grew up in, we didn't have cell phones. We didn't have cell phones. Cell phones didn't come out until the 2000s. When I was almost done with high school, that's when cell phones came out. There was not Google. There was not YouTube. There was not all this social media stuff. And to see now in her generation, there's all this stuff that she has, but the information is so much more now than it was back then. But as a parent, sometimes it's frustrating, because when a kid is not doing what you tell them to do, you tend to put your autobiography on them. Autobiography, if you read, The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, Stephen Covey talks about that. As far as us, you putting your autobiography onto someone, how you feel and what you think, and how everything was for you versus listening. But ownership is important. Like, ownership is something that we lack, because we don't take ownership of our lives, because we really don't, because we tend to blame it on something, whether it's the weather, whether it's our manager. You will not hear me say boss. I do not like using the word boss. I just don't know why. It's just something I just never really liked using. But your manager, your direct report, whoever, your wife, your kids, everything that happens in your life is regarding ownership. You taking ownership of your life, whether it's good or bad, it's your fault. I've been around family members where it was always someone else's fault but theirs. Their life is miserable, not because of them and the decisions that they made and the actions that they took because of the decisions they made. It's someone else's fault. It's easy to pass the blame. Think about generational wealth. You have to take ownership of generational wealth. If you're going to leave generational wealth for the next generation, and listen, this is not just about, I don't want this podcast to be just about, people who have kids. It doesn't necessarily have to be about that. You may have nieces and nephews, cousins, someone that you or they look up to you, that you can take notes or, however, and be able to at least have an understanding. Because generational wealth, I think, for me, this podcast, building generational wealth, to take that action, you got to have the right mindset. But ownership, I think, is 3 things. You got to have discipline, you got to take ownership, and you got to have good habits. So that's why I highly recommend 2 books I've been talking about: Extreme Ownership and Atomic Habits by James Clear, Extreme Ownership by Jocko Willnick. And he really brought it home when it comes to ownership. Taking ownership in business, taking ownership of your job. Let's say you're at a 9-to-5 right now, or at a job, and you haven't been promoted. It's been years, months. you have not been promoted. Rather than complaining or saying it's the manager's fault or it's a teammate's fault, you're seeing you're getting passed over. Maybe taking ownership of what you're not doing. Maybe you don't have a really good relationship with your manager. Maybe you don't have the skill sets. Like Jim Rohn says, don't wish it was easier, wish you were better. Don't wish for more problems, wish for more skills. It's so true. Because even for me, who's in IT right now, technology changes month to month, it seems like these days. But if you're not keeping it up with that trend, you're not developing skill sets, it's nothing for the company to come and terminate you and let you go because you're easily replaceable. They can hire someone younger sometimes, or they can hire someone who has more skill sets than you do that brings more value to the business. Jim Rohn, he says something. If you follow Jim Rohn, I highly recommend that too. Go on YouTube, search Jim Rohn, and he was talking about how a CEO of a company, if the CEO, let's say he gets paid $30 million, everyone's outrageous. Oh my gosh, it's $30 million. That's outrageous. And we start talking about, there's people who don't make all that money. But what Jim Rohn said was, what if that CEO is bringing the company $3 billion? So he is worth the $30 million. It's nothing for the company because of the value he's bringing in. Thinking about the NFL, Roger Goodell. Roger Goodell, NFL commissioner, makes $30 million. But the revenue the NFL brings in, the pockets he fills as far as the owner, is billions of dollars. National Football League is the number one sport in America, not worldwide. Worldwide, you could go soccer and you can go basketball. I think those two are passed. But in the U.S., domestically, the National Football League is the number one sport here. Ratings are through the roof. Do you not think Roger Goodell is worth that $30 million? Do you not think the other 32 NFL owners don't think he's worth $30 million? Because of the revenue he's bringing in, consistently, the NFL ratings are number one. I mean, the Super Bowl, we're about to have the Super Bowl here February 2nd, and it's going to be the most watched event on the day. 150 million users. In the United States, we have there's probably about 370 million people here in the United States. So that means half the country will be watching the football. My wife, who doesn't even follow football, she's already planning, hey, we're going to have a Super Bowl party. We're going to invite people over. Because that's the only time, that's the only event she really knows. But going back to what I'm saying is ownership is very, very, because we lack that. We lack the ownership. And the good thing what I like about this book, Extreme Ownership by Jocko Willink, I like how he talks about his experience and he applies it to business. I mean, he's had to go into businesses where, let's say you have a bad employee. Well, it's not the bad employee's fault. It's your fault. What if you're not performing? What if you're not, you could be, but there's something you're lacking. Maybe you don't have the skill sets. Relationship with your kids, relationship in business. What if you got a business partner, you guys are not always on the same page? Figure out why. Take ownership of why. Maybe there's a communication problem. Maybe you didn't set the expectations. Because if all that is already set and your partner is still a bad partner, then now it becomes, hey, we need to sever ties. And sometimes we're afraid to do that. Your marriage, you could be your wife, she's a big spender and you're not. It's not your wife's fault, it's your fault. Because your wife may not understand why you the way you are, or maybe why you believe, hey, instead of going out there and spending this much money, here's where we're at. Communication. Taking ownership once you do, and it's not just to take ownership at face value. It's to really take ownership. Like, I'm gonna give a personal application for myself. And I mean, I'm going back to a 9 to 5 job. I've been out of work for about over a month now, taking care of my daughter. And the one thing, and I'm like, man, I got to go back to work. After you've been out of work for so long, sometimes it's kind of hard to really get that groove going again, unless you really love your job. And it's not that I don't love my job. It's not what I want to do. So I know mentally I'm getting myself ready to say, okay, short term, this is a short term thing. This is short term. It's helping me pay the bills, take care of my family, put food on the table. But this cannot be a long term goal, because long term, I want to be able to have time to sit down on a Monday morning, take my kid and go spend some time with my daughter, or go out and go work out 10 a.m. instead of have to, when you get out of work, 5 p.m. to go work out, where you have more time to do stuff. But I have to stop and say, you know what, Amir, I got to stop complaining, because complaining is not going to do anything. And no one listens. Quite frankly, no one really listens. To be honest with you, it was a saying when I used to be a retail manager. Customers would come in, or guests, we used to call them. They would come in, and then they would be, hey, how you doing? I'm doing great. It's not like, it makes no difference of complaining, because no one listens. Because everybody has their own problems. Everybody got their own issues that they're dealing with. So by me listening to you complaining, I mean, I could offer you advice. I can show empathy, not sympathy, but I can empathize with your situation. But at the end of the day, when I walk into my address in my home, that's my world. So taking on someone else's problems is not going to do anything for me. So at the end of the day, taking ownership. You may have a cousin, friend, whoever, that one person where it's like, man, it's always somebody's fault. That was probably the person I would give this book to and recommend this book to, because they're the ones who probably it's never their fault. And when it's never your fault, it's not a good way to live. Generational wealth will never happen for you if you don't take ownership of it. If you don't take ownership and say, from this point today, whatever happens to my life, whether it's good or bad, is my fault. And really be genuinely honest about it. Because Jocko Willink says that. He says, it's not just about, you can't just do that face value. Oh, yeah, it's not my fault. Yeah, it's my fault, but, no one will respect that. But they will respect you if you truly are very taking ownership. I mean, lately on the headlines, Antonio Brown has been on the headlines. It's crazy. And that's one guy, I don't know if anybody follow the NFL, but if you do and you've been following Antonio Brown, it's not that he's interesting. What really gets me with him is the lack of accountability, because it's never no one else's fault. It's someone else's fault. Sorry, I said that wrong. It's never his fault. It's someone else's fault. And that's a perfect example of someone who lacks accountability. Now, we can say, well, he may have mental issues and yada, yada, yada. But at the end of the day, it's not. Think about it. This guy went to 7 straight Pro Bowls, and now he's out of the league. Is it the league's fault? No, it's her fault. But the surroundings around him are bigging him up and saying, well, no, it's not you, AB. It's them. No, AB, it's you. It's not the NFL. His agent left him. And I just heard this morning, his lawyer is leaving him because he's self-destructing in our very eyes. It's crazy. 1 minute you're on top, and the next minute you're down. So ownership, folks. Take ownership. Everything from this point in your life, good or bad, is your fault. Now, we can go to extreme and say, well, what if I get cancer? or something, to that nature. Well, one thing Jocko said, which is true, he says, well, even if that happens to you, what do you do about it? So the doctor diagnosed you and says you got terminal cancer and you may live 6 months. What are you going to do within those 6 months? Are you going to sit there and cry about it? Or are you going to live out your life and take ownership? I mean, I know that's a little extreme, but listen to the podcast. If you guys get a chance, listen to Jocko Willink on Bigger Pockets podcast. It is a very, very, it was to me one of the best podcasts I've listened to on Bigger Pockets, because it really dives deep, not just ownership in business, ownership in life, ownership in relationship. Even read the book about extreme ownership. Sorry for the lengthy podcast. It was just something that got in my mind. I really wanted to talk about. But if you are listening to this podcast, some recommendations that I have been talking about earlier: Atomic Habits by James Clear. Go read that book. Really awesome book. Extreme Ownership by Jocko Willink. Go read that book. Great book. Also, and if you get a chance to read some leadership books, John Maxwell, he has some really good books on leadership. But folks, 3 things in life that's going to help you get to where you need to, want to. And then for me, I'm going to put this in practice. Discipline, number 1, ownership, number 2, and my habits, number 3. Because my habits will determine my future. If I have bad habits, I'm not going to get there. If I don't take ownership, I'm not going to get where I want in life. And when I do take ownership, your kids, if you have any, will see that. They'll respect you even more. Your wife, your relationships, because it will even help you improve on your communication. Because then you'll think, man, I need to maybe explain things a little bit better, set expectations more. So I leave you with that. What everybody should be thinking: generational wealth. Have a good day, folks.